In the previous video, linked in the playlist below the like button, we talked about configuring entity classes using a JPA annotation. We're going to build on that here. However, we're going to use auto generation, and this is for IDs for entities. Previously mentioned that, so just kind of like a teaser, and now we're actually doing it. Just a fun fact though, if we wanted to, like inside of our employee right here, you know how we talked about where we can set the name of it like this? Well, there's another thing that we could do. We could use the @column annotation to determine what column our fields are in. However, we're not going to be going over that. That's just something to note from a previous video. We are going to use the generated value so that the ID field will be auto-generated. So to do this, what we need to do first is have our @generated value. We need to decide what is going to be generated for us, and it's going to be our ID right here. After this, we need to go into our constructor, and the reason why we need to go into our constructor is because previously, if you were following along, we had integer, and then we had whatever, I think it was like ID, and well, we can't do this anymore, right? Because it's going to be auto-generated. We don't need to have that in there. So from that, we need to go into our app.java, where we actually assign things inside of here, and you can see that I removed the ID. We don't have the ID in here anymore, because it's going to be auto-generated for us. So we take it out of the constructor, we're going to have to take it out of here as well. So after this, just make sure you have your generated value, and if anything else needs changing, which if you're following along, nothing else needs changing. If we wanted to, we could have this @ID and @generated value on top of our get ID. That would get it. It's basically the same thing. So that is it for our employee.java class. We have our POM XML, we know we have our dependencies that look like this, and the top part looks like this, and our persistence XML, which looks like this, and this is just connecting to our SQL. So it's just going to look something like this. Now, let's go into our app.java. From here, we have this department, but we're not going to worry about this yet. This is coming up soon. It's going to be in the same video, but note how we have our first employee, our second employee, and we have our third employee. Now previously, after we created a third employee, we had to actually put something inside of it. Like we had to set its ID. We do third employee dot set ID, and then we pass an ID inside of here, and that would create it. However, we don't need to do that here because it's auto-generated for us. So let's actually comment this out for the departments. Let's comment this persist out, and we only have the persistent here. It's still in our try catch final, and then let's try to run this. Pulling this up, we get a successful, or we should get a successful run. We can see the first thing that we do is we drop if exists department, and that's only because this drop if exists department is I've made this department.java, and inside of our persistence.xml file, we know that we're just going to be in here, and we have this drop and create, where we're going to drop and create if a table exists. So this drop and create for department, and drop table if exists for employee. So if they exist, we're going to drop them like that, and then we're going to create our tables through our Hibernate. So we can see that we have our create table department, and we create our table employee. So if we were to go into here and say we didn't create the department yet, which if you're following along, you haven't done yet, we would X this out. This would not be inside of our console or terminal right here. We would not have anything related to department, only employee. So we have our create table employee. Again, don't worry about the department yet. And then we have our create table Hibernate sequence, but we don't need to worry about this yet either. This is going to come up soon with our department. It's just another part of this. So we're going to want to insert our values inside of here. We can go into our MySQL. We can go into our select star from employees. We can run this, and we can see we have 1, 2, 3. Our IDs are auto-generated. Now, if we do the department, we're going to see that it's empty because we have nothing inside of here. We're going to come back to all of this in a second with the department hybrid sequence. Looking back at our employee, we can see that we have 1, 2, and 3, and then we have these as null. Now, this is taken care of by Hibernate. If we look at the show create table, now if we look at our show create table for employee, we can open this by opening table value like this. We see that our ID is not null and does not increment. So the generated value is not handled by MySQL, but by the JPA provider, which here is Hibernate. That's what we're using here. So what if we want to do this for more than one entity? Well, let's go to our department class. This is what we're making inside of our com.skillsoft.jpa package. So inside of here, we want to be more specific about how a value is generated. All we have here are these values. We have a parameters constructor, a default constructor, and then getters and setters. If we want to be more specific about how something is generated, this instructs Hibernate to, we're going to use our @generated_value and have parameter inside of here. This instructs Hibernate to generate primary keys to an entity using the database identity column. So it's like setting an ID column and having it auto increment. Let's go back to our app.java. All we need to have here is this persist, and then we just need our department inside of here like this. So we are just adding a first department, a second department, we're putting them into our entity manager, and then we can run this. Running this, we're going to get the same output as we should have had earlier. We can see we have our drop if exists. We create our department, we create our employee, and then we have our Hibernate sequence, and that's from our department when we use this part right here inside of our generated value. Now we are going to want to insert, so we're going to insert our values. After we insert our values, we can go into our MySQL workbench, and running this, we have our Hibernate sequence where we create the table for our Hibernate. We have our next value, and it's going to look like that. Now, if we run the select star from employee, it's just going to be the same. Select star from department, we have our floor 3, floor 6, and that is what's provided. And if we select from our Hibernate sequence, we can see that our next value is going to be 4. That's the next value that's going to give us for our ID. So if we go into our app and we go into this right here, duplicate it, we'll just call this 3 department, or we can't start it with a number, so we'll do 3rd department, and we'll call this testing, and this is also going to be on floor 6, and then we will just duplicate this and make this a 3rd department. We can then run this. We're going to go back to our MySQL. We are going to redo the department. We have 1, 2, and 3, and our next value is going to be 4. So I don't exactly know why the next value is just 4. I think it might have to do with this one right here. So not actually the department, but it's actually looking at the employee. We can test this by making another employee. So let's make this 4th or falth, and then we can do our persist. We can pass in our falth here, and then we can run this again. Let's go back to our MySQL workbench. Let's run our employee. We can see that we have 4 here, and from our Hibernate sequence, we can see our next value is 5. So the Hibernate sequence actually has to deal with our employee right here. And well, that's going to be it for our department class. I got a little bit confused about the incrementing. Looks like the incrementing was based off of our employee. But that's going to be it for looking at auto-generated IDs for entities. Next we look at defining a composite key class, and then we're going to go over implementing the composite keys.